Tonight we're actually not going to finish the study of the Judges because there's too much to say about Samuel. So we're going to start with the first part tonight, talking about his birth and where he's coming from, and a little bit about an overall view of him. But we're talking mostly about his where he comes from. And so when we talk about Samuel, his story overlaps with what we know about Eli. We only know about Eli when he's already old, but he was the previous judge we talked about last time. And Samuel's mother, Hannah, was married to a man named Elkanah, and he had 2 wives. The other wife had children, but Hannah could not have any children. And this really bothered her, and especially because the other wife seemed to be quite ugly about it. And so one time when they were at the temple, they went there once a year to offer sacrifices. She went to the temple and prayed for a son, and she promised God that if he would give her a son, she would give him back to God. And Eli was there at the time, saw Hannah praying silently with her mouth moving, and thought she was drunk, so he rebuked her. We talked a little bit about that last time. But when he found out that she was actually praying and was not drunk, he blessed her and requested that God fulfill her prayer, and God did fulfill her prayer. So when God did give her a son, in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and in verse 20, it says, "So it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked for him from the Lord." So the name Samuel apparently means something like God hears. And so she's saying God heard when she asked for him, and so she named him Samuel, God hears. Very similar to the name Ishmael. But he's someone who is an answer to prayer. So Hannah couldn't have any children before this, but because of her prayer, she has Samuel. And she's made this promise to give him to God. So in chapter 1 and verses 21 through 28, it says, "Now the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, 'Not until the child is weaned. Then I will take him, that he may appear before the Lord and remain there forever.'" Now, we'll just stop there and say this is, she seems almost like she's delaying here, but she's not. She can't just hand him over if he hasn't even been weaned. And so she's saying the time that she wants to take him to the temple is when she's going to leave him there and he's going to stay forever. She has every intention of honoring her promise to God and giving him to God. And remember, in the law of Moses, the husband has the authority when he hears what his wife vows, that he can cancel it, right? He can say, "No, we're not going to do that." He has authority over his wife in that way. So, if he hears what she vows and he confirms it, then they're bound by that, or she is bound by it. And Elkanah confirms her vow. He has agreed that this is what they are going to do. So Elkanah, her husband, said to her, "Do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only let the Lord establish his word." Then the woman stayed and nursed her son until she had weaned him. Now, when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with 3 bulls, 1 ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered a bull and brought the child to Eli. And she said, "O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood by you here praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition, which I asked of him. Therefore I also have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord." So they worshiped the Lord there. So she says, this is something that I prayed for. God answered my prayer, and so I'm lending him to the Lord. Usually, we talk about our children as the Lord is lending them to us, right? They belong to him, and we're responsible for raising them for a time. But here she puts it the other way around. She's lending him to the Lord, but on a permanent basis. So as long as he lives, he is loaned to the Lord, lent to the Lord. So she fulfills her vow, and she's saying he's going to stay there forever. She's giving her child to the Lord forever. And I think this is something that we should think about. How would we feel if we're giving our child to God forever? In fact, we should be. That should be exactly what we're doing. We should be raising our children to serve God forever, right? That's what we are supposed to be doing. But in this case, she was going to leave him as a young child so that he would serve God. And how would you feel if you did that? Well, I think most of us might be a little bit sad, that we're giving up our child. This is a difficult thing. But that's not how Hannah thought about it. In 1 Samuel chapter 2, just a continuation while she's there at the temple with Eli and giving Samuel over, it says in verses 1 through 5, and the prayer that she prays is longer than this, but it says, "And Hannah prayed and said, 'My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. I smile at my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. No one is holy like the Lord, for there is none besides you, nor is there any rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let no arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is the God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty men are broken, and those who stumbled are girded with strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, and the hungry have ceased to hunger. Even the barren has borne 7, and she who has borne many children has become feeble.'" You can get an idea of what she's rejoicing about. The other wife, who had many children, had been rejoicing that she could not have children. She was being ugly about it. She was her enemy about it. And now God has heard her prayer and has given her this child. Even though she's giving him to the Lord, she is perfectly happy. She is rejoicing in God. This is all because of what God has done. He has brought down the one who is proud and raised up the humble. And this is very similar to what we read in Mary's prayer in Luke chapter 1 and verses 46 through 55. It's a very similar prayer. So this is the attitude that she has. She is happy that the Lord has done this, and that even though she's giving her child to the Lord, that does not bother her at all, because she trusts God and she's happy that her child is going to serve this great God. And so in chapter 2 of 1 Samuel, in verses 18 through 21, it says, "But Samuel ministered before the Lord even as a child, wearing a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, 'The Lord give you descendants from this woman for the loan that was given to the Lord.' Then they would go to their own home. And the Lord visited Hannah so that she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the child Samuel grew before the Lord." So we see Samuel starting his work as a small child serving before the Lord. He's not serving as a priest. A small child couldn't do that. But he is serving in the temple. He's serving the priests. And we'll talk about it more in this lesson as well about that. But God then gives Hannah even more children. And so that's further blessing because of what she has done, because of her attitude. This is a wonderful thing. God has blessed her as a result. And so in chapter 3, we find as Samuel is growing, God uses him for more things. In verses 1 through 5, now the boy Samuel ministered to the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no widespread revelation, and it came to pass at that time, while Eli was lying down in his place, when his eyes had begun to grow so dim that he could not see, and before the lamp of God went out in the tabernacle of the Lord where the ark of God was, and while Samuel was lying down, that the Lord called Samuel. And he answered, "Here I am." So he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." And he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." And he went and lay down again. And you may remember this story that it happened a couple more times, and then finally Eli figured out it was God calling. And so then he said, "Well, answer, speak, Lord, I'm listening." And he did that, and God gave him a prophecy against Eli. But God is speaking to Samuel. A very clear thing we learn from this is that God didn't speak through feelings. He heard something with his ears. He thought it was Eli calling him, but it was God calling him. When God spoke, people actually heard. They heard the words of God. It was not just a thought that came into their mind. But Samuel became this prophet of God. In chapter 3, verses 19 through 21, it says, "So Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel had been established as a prophet of the Lord. Then the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord." And then in 1 Samuel 7, verse 15, it tells us that Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. And in Acts 13, Paul says in verse 20, after that he gave them judges for about 450 years until Samuel the prophet. Okay, so Samuel is the last of the judges. And he's going to be the one who anoints the kings. But Samuel comes from the tribe of Levi through Kohath, Izhar, Korah, and his father Elkanah. There's a lot in between. And then he has a son named Joel, who has a son named Heman, who is going to serve as a singer in the temple under David. But Samuel is a Levite, but he's not a priest. Okay, the Levites were to help the priests. That was their given role. Only those descended from Aaron could be priests, and Samuel was not. He was not a descendant of Aaron. Some think that because he was raised by Eli, he might be considered adopted by him, and then he could serve as a priest, but that's never listed in the genealogy, and it's never mentioned that he or any of his descendants served as priests. It's not mentioned that his father was a priest, nothing like that. And as a child, Samuel was an assistant to the priests, which was the role of the Levites, who were not from Aaron. And he's usually referred to as a prophet or a seer. He's actually never referred to as a priest. A lot of us thought he was. I thought he was until this study. I'm sure I've taught in the past that he was a priest. In 1 Samuel 2:18 that we read, it says that he wore the linen ephod as a boy, and some people think that means he served as a priest, but little boys couldn't serve as priests. And we find in 2 Samuel 6, verse 14, that David wore a linen ephod when they brought the ark of God to Jerusalem. So it's generally connected with the temple or tabernacle and the service to God there, but it's not only priests that wore a linen ephod. And there's just nowhere that says he was a priest. so then we might ask, well, how could he offer sacrifices? Because we find later he offers lots of sacrifices, but we find David building an altar and sacrificing according to the command of God. We find Elijah doing that. We find Gideon doing that. I think we could probably find others who were not priests who built altars and sacrificed. But none of them, including Samuel, offered sacrifices at the temple or tabernacle. That was only for the priests. And in 1 Samuel 13, we're not going to read all of this, but this is the time when King Saul, offers a sacrifice. And we sometimes argue that, well, it was wrong for Saul to do that because he wasn't a priest and Samuel was. But actually, that's not what made it wrong. It says in verse 8 that he waited 7 days according to the time set by Samuel. And what is Samuel? He's a prophet of God. In verse 9, he stops waiting and he offers the burnt offering. And then when Samuel does show up, as soon as he finished, Samuel says, "What have you done?" And he said, "Well, you didn't come within the days appointed." He knew there was a time when Samuel was supposed to come and he was supposed to wait for him. And in verse 13, Samuel told Saul, "You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you." He doesn't tell us what commandment that is here, but based on the other things, it seems that the commandment was to wait for Samuel and Samuel would come. It was a lack of faith because of fear and the people running away that caused him to not obey that, to offer the sacrifice himself. I'm not sure that it would have been wrong for him to offer a sacrifice otherwise. I don't know, but certainly because he's a prophet of God, Samuel could do that as a prophet, and it was according to the commandment of God. So Samuel had special parents, special in their character. Not only did Hannah happily give her son to the Lord, but Elkanah did too. They were both happy to give their son to God to serve him. And he served as a Levite assistant to the priests as a young boy. We don't really know what happened when Eli and Eli's sons died. We know at some point Samuel moved to Ramah, which is where his parents were from, got married, had children. Maybe it happened around that time. Who knows? I don't know. But even from a young age, God used Samuel as his prophet, and he served as a prophet his entire life. And as far as I know, he's the only prophet who prophesied even after he died, which we'll talk about later, not tonight. And Samuel also served as the final judge of Israel, the one who will anoint the first two kings. But our main takeaway is actually about his mother from what we talked about today. Be like Hannah. Pray with faith, keep your promises, be happy to give your children to the Lord forever, and be blessed like Hannah was. All right, that's the lesson for tonight. Thank you.